I'm sharing my screen through Zoom. Can you see it now?
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, it
Okay,
works now.
great.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Yeah, so Ample has an elastic supply that adjusts every day according to demand in the marketplace, right? So the unique way that supply adjusts is that whenever new tokens or Ample get created, it goes to everyone on the network proportional to what they own. And when it gets removed from the network, it comes from everyone proportional to what they own. So what this means is that everyone has equal standing in the system, right? It's completely non-extractive, so there's no individual or party that extracts seigniorage, the profits that you get from printing money. It's distributed and shared across the entire network. And then the other resulting quality of this method of adjusting supply is that it's non-dilutive the same way Bitcoin is, right? So it has that same soundness property that everyone likes so much about, Bitcoin and other, commodities and precious metals. And then also because the supply adjusts every day according to demand, it means that there's also a long-term equilibrium unit of account, right? So this is very important. So this unlocks many use cases for Ample that don't exist so much for Bitcoin. And it also has some very nice properties when you compare it to stablecoins. So I'll get into both of those soon. But here, first, there's a sort of quick illustration about how it might look. So the Ampleforth Protocol is defined by the supply policy that takes market information through an Oracle system, and we're partnered with Chainlink to get this market data. So every day, up to once per day, the supply can change. We call this the rebase operation. So when the 24-hour volume-weighted average price of Ample is above the price target, it means that there is not enough supply to meet demand, so we increase supply. And then when the price is below the target, it means that we decrease supply. So you can see that in this simple animation here. So effectively, that seeks to shift volatility from unit price to unit count. So I think when you're thinking about Ample, it is sort of a new asset we've never seen before. So it often takes people a while to wrap their head around it and what it means. I think the easiest way to really understand what's going on is to compare it to both Bitcoin and to stablecoins. So here's a very simple example about how Ample unlocks the safe denomination of debt and how you can use it for stable contracts, right? So our goal for Ampleforth is really to create a new financial building block that can support a more robust and resilient financial system on top. So in this example, say you were to borrow, 1 Bitcoin from your friend for a year, right? And you're going to pay it back a year from now. Now, as we all know, the volatility of Bitcoin is very high, right? Because it's deflationary, it's fixed supply, it's unable to respond to the needs of the marketplace. And so every marginal change in demand results in a marginal change of price. And so a year from now, we don't know whether the price of Bitcoin will be, $25,000 or $10,000. We've definitely seen swings that large, right? So if you borrow Bitcoin now, and then the price of Bitcoin doubles, then as the borrower, you're on the hook for twice as much purchasing power as you thought you would be. And so you're at very high risk of default. So once people start defaulting on loans, that can have cascading failures across the rest of the financial ecosystem. And because just the nature of the currency being a medium of exchange, if everyone across the entire globe is dealing with something like Bitcoin and borrowing it, there's correlated risk here, right? So if one person defaults, then it's very likely that lots and lots of other people will default. So it's a very dangerous situation that scares any insurance adjuster, right? They try to avoid correlated risk as much as possible. Now, in Ample's case, if you were to borrow, say, 100 Ample, then you always know how much you're going to be responsible for paying back in the future, right? Because no matter what happens to the overall demand for Ample, the market cap and supply of Ample could grow drastically, 2x, 5x, 10x, or shrink too. But you always know, because you denominate your stable contracts with Ample's stable unit of account, how much purchasing power you'll be responsible for paying back, right? So if I borrowed 1,000 Ample now, 1 year from now, if the market cap of Ample doubled, I would still have to pay back exactly the same amount, plus interest. So this is one specific quality that allows Ample to be a building block for a much safer financial ecosystem, both decentralized finance and traditional finance. Now, some people then, go on and ask, well, what's the difference between Ample and stablecoins? Because stablecoins also have a unit account that is, a very useful property. And so there is, two kinds of stablecoins. There's, and they each have their downfalls and risks. So the first type of stablecoin, dollar collateralized stablecoin, Tether, that I'm sure you're all familiar with. They, rely on centralized banking relationships, right? So there's a bank somewhere that holds the dollars behind the tokens. So that's a point of risk, right? A single point of failure and a single point of trust. And then, the more algorithmic style stablecoins like Make or Die, or other projects like that. These rely on collateral systems, which are essentially debt marketplaces. And we've all seen, historically, what can happen to these sorts of marketplaces in just normal history, right? So over and over again, we've seen failures of market and black swan scenarios, but also at country level, and even in very, very safe markets like repo markets, repurchase agreements that are overnight, fully collateralized. Sometimes we see liquidity shortfalls there, right? So if you have a financial building block that itself relies on another marketplace, that is another source of risk. And then also it has the same sort of correlated market risk scenario that we're hoping to avoid. So Ample is able to give you a stable unit of account without having to banking relationship and without having to rely on lenders of last resort who would have to come in and bail out the system if needed. So that's the high level of Ample. We have a lot more economic information on our site that I encourage people to go look at. And then, so now I'm happy to dive into how Ample is going to work with Tron. So right now, this is the overall architecture of Ample on Ethereum. There's three main modules. There is the Oracle, the supply policy, and the token itself, the ERC20. So the ERC20 is the Ample that you trade and transfer. So every day, the market Oracle gets data about the price of Ample and then reports it to the supply policy or the monetary policy that makes the decision about how to adjust the supply. Then the monetary policy instructs the token about how to increase or decrease the supply of Ample. So if we were to extend this across chains, what would that look like, right? So, a monetary asset is defined by two qualities. It's defined by the nature of its scarcity. So in our case, that's the supply policy. And it's defined by its use value, right? And so Ample being a pure monetary asset, it's not subject to external biases or fluctuations from non-monetary use, which makes it a very clean, very efficient, very predictable monetary asset. So if we want Ample on both, say, Ethereum and Tron, as long as anyone can transfer Ample between both locations, and as long as the Ample on both locations respond to the same supply policy, then they're all the same Ample, right? So it doesn't really matter. This is, in particular where you are. So, Ample on Tron will be a first-class citizen, just like anywhere else it's been before. So I think that's really exciting. This unlocks Ample as a potential value highway between different ecosystems, and because Ample is not tied to any particular blockchain, it also makes it a very promising chain agnostic money and store of value. So I don't know how much time I have left. Beyond here, it gets a little bit more into the technical details. I'm happy to keep going, or I can stop if we're short on time. Okay, I'll keep going. So this is a generic bridge, right? So you can see, there's two different chains here and a bridge in between. So in general, the easiest way to think about bridges is that you call some function on a handler on one side that gets written to an event log, and then relayers pick up that event and then transfer it over to the bridge on the other chain that gets reported to that handler. So it's fairly straightforward in theory. The details do get kind of difficult. So here you can see, one AMPL transferred from beginning to end. It starts with the depositor on the left side and ends on the right side. And then also it shows how it works in the case where, the AMPL supply itself is changing, right? So you can imagine there's some interesting security details here that you do have to be aware of. So, we want to avoid people being able to exploit race conditions. So for example, if someone were to get a rebase on one chain and then race their coins by doing a transfer to the other chain before the rebase message gets there, then they'll be able to get two rebases if it's positive, or they could potentially avoid a rebase completely if it's negative. So we need to avoid that case. And so the way we handle that is we send along an extra payload of data, which just tells the receiving side, what the total supply was at the time of transfer. So it can, credit or debit the correct amount when that happens. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same as what you saw in the previous diagram. If you were to transfer from, say, Ethereum to Tron, then your tokens get stored into this safe here, or the vault, on the left-hand side. So you get locked up by a bridge, and then it mints new AMPL on the other side, on Tron, for the user. And then the rebase is very similar, except it's, instead of value transfer, it's just a single generic function call. For us, both the transfers and the rebases are both generic function calls. That's the easiest way for us to think about it. The other wrinkle is that we have an orchestrator here that just notifies all the potential downstream platforms that a supply adjustment has taken place. Right, so we have that on Ethereum, and then we also have that on Tron. So there you go. I think that's a pretty high-level view of the project and how it works with Tron. We're really excited to make this happen and bring AMPL to all the Tron users as quickly as we can. We're hoping to have that ready to go in Q1, early Q1 of this year. Yeah, I don't know how much time I have left. Happy to answer questions, or I could keep on going at some appendix slides.
Yeah.
Are we on time?
Yeah, Brandon, you can keep it talking. Still go with your presentation.
Sure, sounds good. Yeah, so this is a little bit more about our motivation, which I talked on earlier. Is can we create a Evan and I, our curiosity got captured in the early days of Bitcoin, right? And this was the first time where anyone could generate scarcity, right? Which was very exciting. It's a very difficult problem to solve in computer science. And so we thought the potential for this was very exciting, but there were some things that we didn't like so much about the existing systems. Back then it was just Bitcoin. In particular, the sort of lack of unit of account and inflationary nature, we think didn't lead to a healthier financial ecosystem, right? We, at least within the US, we moved off of the gold standard for very good reasons, because it was reaching market failure. If we try to just recreate that again, we shouldn't expect anything different. And so once Ethereum came out, we saw another tool set that could allow us to create new financial primitives to solve some of these problems. And so that's sort of the guiding vision of everything that we're working on. And so the creation of AMPL is an asset we've never really seen before in any marketplace. It allows new use cases, one of which I talked about earlier in the lending case. And so it means that we can potentially do lots of new things with finance itself, right? So we sort of call this elastic finance. So right now we're focused on building up the stack of elastic finance, which includes the base level liquidity. So encouraging a highly liquid market for AMPL. So like monetary assets are defined by their use value and their scarcity, and their efficiency is measured by liquidity, right? If you want to be able to borrow and lend AMPL, you need to have confidence that you can enter and exit positions easily and efficiently. So liquidity is the base of the stack. Lending, of course, is sort of the engine of so much financial activity and also fuels derivatives. And then we view this existing across all chains. So I think one thing that makes Tron interesting is the ecosystem that is being built up there, including the AMM Just Swap and the stablecoin and lending platforms. So we hope that we can support all of those applications going forward. Now, the other thing that makes AMPL interesting from a holder perspective is that we think it's very likely to be uncorrelated with other digital currencies, right? So if you look at the market of digital currencies so far, they're all very highly correlated with each other, right? So if Bitcoin goes up, then everything else goes up. If Bitcoin goes down, everything else goes down too, especially when you're looking at purely monetary assets, Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin, Zcash, all those. And there's lots of reasons for this. One of which is, they don't have very many, concrete market use cases right now. So it's still kind of speculative assets, but also they all follow the exact same set of rules. I mean, the same monetary policies. They sort of fixed supply. I mean, they have an emission curve, but a long-term fixed supply. And so you shouldn't expect them to be any different from each other. And so if they're all sort of the same, from a just purely, economics perspective, they're sort of interchangeable, right? So with AMPL, because it responds to different set of rules, we expect it will move differently. And so this is what we spent most of our second white paper exploring. We wrote this before launch. AMPL has been launched since the summer of 2019. And since then, it has definitely played out that way. The correlation has been very low. So what does this mean? This means that it actually makes sense to hold AMPL in a portfolio, right? So if you hold Bitcoin, there's probably not much reason to hold anything else if it moves exactly the same. But if you hold an uncorrelated asset, then you can increase your Sharpe ratios, portfolio metrics, and reduce overall risk, because everything AMPL and BTC aren't guaranteed to move exactly the same way. Which also means that if you use AMPL as collateral in a basket of assets, then your collateral is safer potentially and can reduce risk long term. So this was the movement pattern that we sort of theorized in the white paper. This was published in collaboration with some economists at the Hoover Institute of Stanford University. So this is how we expect it to work. So on the left, you can see a sort of price series where, within the band of the equilibrium, it can sort of oscillate up and down, from T0 to T1, nothing happens to supply. As soon as it goes outside of that band, then the supply starts to change. Then the market cap is the product of these. And so you see a peak, right, which is a point of arbitrage where market actors who are seeking profit can, through activities in the marketplace, get profit and help the system return back to equilibrium. So if we look at the history of the price so far, it does seem to be playing out this way, which is very exciting for us to see. And here you see the market cap too. So we're going to keep on looking at this data. We also published some statistics on our dashboard, ampleforth.org/dashboard, that I encourage everyone to see. Shows the entire history of the system. And I think just looking at that data gives you a good sense for how the system works and what it's doing.